It is indeed an honor to be here tonight, and I'd like to thank Steve Moss and Dee Velvin, Donald Ross, and a few of the others from the foundation for inviting me to speak here tonight. Truly, it is an honor. This was the family church I grew up in, and Steve and I used to go to MYF. Do you remember that? Methodist Youth Fellowship. I'm not going to tell them what all we used to do, but we had a really good time. I remember that. I don't have any notes, but I've got one of these handheld devices. I'd like to say this church it holds a very special place in my heart. Lovers Lane United Methodist Church. I'm a storyteller. You'll hear a story tonight. I have no words of wisdom, no lessons learned, no bullet points. But there will be one recommendation as we close. That means what you leave with here tonight will be what God wants you to have. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love. Well, now you know I didn't spend any money on singing lessons. But when Donald Ross first invited me to speak, I said, "How long do I have?" He said, "Well, 20 or 30 minutes." I said, "Oh, no." He said, "What's wrong?" I said, "It takes me about an hour and a half to tell the story." He said, "Oh, no." But I went onto the internet and I discovered that the average attention span for most audiences is only 12 minutes. So tonight you get the short version. I graduated from Hillcrest, joined the military, went off to Vietnam, was in serious combat in Vietnam, came home, went to work, became homeless, and that's kind of the start of this story, I guess. But there's a lot of details. There's a lot of other details other than that short story. I'm wondering if I could see a show of hands, who would like to hear some of the details? Most of the hands go up. Very good. I love having a captive audience. If anybody has to leave, just feel free to. But let's go right to Vietnam to save time. It was February 1968. Tet Offensive was going on. I think Walter Cronkite had declared North Vietnamese victory after that Tet Offensive. So, in his mind, Vietnam War was over. But when I got there in the middle of February, it was still going on. I landed in South Vietnam, made my way up towards where the fighting was in a place called Pleiku. Do you remember that, Steve? And then they took me up by a small two-engine airplane called a 123, C-123. Got on the aircraft, the tailgate dropped down. I walked on this aircraft, and it flew for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I asked the loadmaster, I said, "Where's this plane going?" He said, "Man, it's going to the forward battle area." About that time, my knees started knocking. And when it landed, it was in the middle of nowhere. Now, the military has these portable runways. They're called PSP. How many veterans do we have here tonight? We've got several. Thank you for your service. The PSP is perforated steel plate. It links together, and you can lay it down on the ground, and you can have a runway. And that's what this was. It was there were 2 runways in Khartoum near Dak To, a place near Dak To. There were 2 runways. I think I was on runway 1. Got off of that thing, and I was expecting to find a real handsome-looking bunch of guys. What I found was 1,000-mile stairs. The uniforms, the oil looked like it needed to be changed in these uniforms. These guys weren't happy to see me. I was a new guy. These guys looked awful. But just a couple of months earlier, on Thanksgiving, the unit that I was assigned to lost 225 paratroopers right there. And that's what caused me to volunteer to go to Vietnam. I felt like I needed to do my duty, go there, even though it meant death. I was willing to die for this country. I love this country that much. And I saw a lot of young men. You would all be proud of these young men that would die for us, that would die for this country. You would all be proud of them. I saw people volunteer to die. Sir, it's my turn to die. It's my turn to die, sir. Amazing. Amazing. You could see these people, young people that would give their lives for something. And so I joined the unit. Commanding officer said, "What's your MOS?" I told him. He said, "Okay, there's your platoon." And I had a backpack that they'd given me down the rear area, and I thought it was pretty heavy. It probably weighed about 50 pounds. I had a rifle, a bayonet, and a shovel, and a heavy steel pot. And I thought that backpack, we call them rucksacks, I thought that backpack was heavy at 50 pounds. I could hardly carry that. Well, he said, "There's your platoon right there," a bunch of guys brought these 14-pound mortar rounds and dropped them at my feet. There was 4 of them there. And before I know it, they're saying, "All right, let's go." Everybody was standing up, moving out. And I was sitting there looking at these 4 mortar rounds. What do I do with those? Well, this one guy, he had a little mercy on me. He said, "Well, I'll help you get them on your backpack." So when I put those on, 14 pounds each, there's 4 of them, so you can imagine what that is. When I put that on my backpack, I couldn't even get off the ground. I had to get on all 4s and push myself up. And then when I did, the weight on the rucksack was so heavy on my shoulders, I couldn't even take a breath. And then the humidity added on to that. I said, "Lord, what were you thinking when you volunteered to come here? Are you crazy? What were you thinking?" And it started to rain. There was black clouds all over the place. And it was just a real dark, dreary time. I was going to go AWOL back in advanced infantry training. I was going to go AWOL because it was so tough. It was so hard. And the last person I called before I jumped the fence was my mother, Polly Baker. And she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm getting ready to go AWOL." She said, "No, you can't do that." She said, "You signed up to go. You made your bed. Now you lie in it." I hung the phone up, went back to my barracks, wound up in Vietnam, and I'm thinking the same thing. I made my bed, now I got to lie in it. Anyway, everything I owned was on my back. We had about 5 days worth of food, C rations dated 1944. Carried a couple of gallons of water. That's eight pounds a gallon. I had 3 bandoliers of M16 ammunition. That's 21 magazines. M16 weighed 7 pounds. Every afternoon, about 3 o'clock, we'd break and start digging foxholes. Every night, we dug new foxholes to fight from if we got overrun. I dug so many foxholes, I thought I was going to dig my own grave at one time. But we had a place to fight from called a perimeter. Every afternoon about 3 o'clock, we'd dig these foxholes in a circle like the old wagon train guys did. You know, they'd say, make a perimeter, you know, give you something to fight from. And we dig those foxholes all the way around. And in the middle, we had a mortar pit. That's where I hung out, in the middle. It was 12 feet in diameter, 2 feet deep. And we dug all the dirt and sand that came out of those holes went in the sandbags that we carried. And we'd stack them up on the edge, and that would protect you in any incoming. But after all of our hole digging was finished, we could chow down. So we opened up those sea rats, and just some of them were really tasty. You know, when you're hungry, you'll eat anything, right? Well, we chowed down, and then some of the guys wouldn't even eat it. It was so bad. But I ate it. I actually gained weight in Vietnam. I think it was muscle weight. But by about 6 o'clock, the sun started going down, and probably about 6:30, it was dark 30. You could not see your hand in front of your face. And you could hear a pin drop 5 miles away. You think you didn't have to be quiet? That's where I learned how to be quiet. I wish my wife knew today. She's kicking me all the time. Oh, by the way, did I introduce my wife? Let me introduce my wife, Lynn Reed. Would you please stand up, Lynn? Thank you. Thank you, dear. You could hear a pin drop for 5 miles. I'm serious. So you had to be very quiet. You couldn't move. You couldn't have any light at night. If you did any kind of looking at a map at night, you had to have a red lens on that flashlight, and you had to be underneath a poncho, because the red won't destroy your night vision. But the enemy, if you smoked, you had to be underneath the poncho. I didn't smoke, but snipers nearby could see you. You could die at nighttime, taken around right through the head. The lights went out, and then we went on guard duty. We had an hour and a half each pulling guard duty. We had to protect that perimeter, and they probed it often. And there weren't any electric switches to turn lights on. There wasn't any toilets. There wasn't any things, air conditioners. There wasn't any of that. Things that I'd been used to growing up, air conditioners, you know, cars. We had to walk everywhere we went. We were paratroopers, and they paid us $55 more a month, and they expected like $5,000 more a month work. So we were always walking everywhere we went. And when the sun came up, that's when we went to work. We break in camp. We didn't call it camp. We called it lager. But we had to be careful every moment of every day. You could step on an IED. You could take a round from a sniper. You could get rocketed by B-40 rockets. Or they could sneak up on you during the night and throw in a satchel charge and blow you half to smithereens. I was in the jungle. I slept on the ground for over 300 days in the jungle with the snakes and the leeches and the ants and the crickets and the tigers. Yeah, there were tigers over there. Slept on the ground with the leeches. Every morning I had to pull the leeches off me, or I'd wake up at night. They'd be sucking my blood. But we kept our sleeves rolled up because it's like 120 degrees out in the sun. It was hot. So we kept our sleeves rolled up. And you could walk by these plants. They had sharp edges like razor blades. You could get a cut, and if you didn't doctor that cut, it would swell up and puster and make pus inside. If you didn't doctor that, you would die. So I found a great use for the leeches. I just put them on my infections, let them suck that poison out. I'd watch them swell up and then just drop to the ground. They'd be deader than a doornail. That poison would kill them leeches. So the leech actually became my friends. Anyway, the very first ambush I walked into, there's 2 of us that died instantly. Bullets right to the head. The company beside us lost 8 8 guys the same day assaulting this one ridgeline. We pulled back. This first ambush I'd ever been in my life. Scared the ever-loving snot out of me. We pulled back and probably about 500 meters away, got on top of another hill. And I guess we kind of thought we were safe. Because one of my buddies named Daniel Burr got up on this big rock and he was shaving, had this stainless steel mirror. He was shaving. And Platoon Sergeant said, "Get off that rock, Daniel, you're going to get shot." He said, "I'm okay, sir." About that time, bam! He was on the ground. And we rushed him out to an area where a helicopter could pick him up. And I was talking to him. He wasn't breathing through his mouth or his nose. He was breathing through these 2 holes, one from his front and one through his back, called a sucking chest wound. All we could do out there is put plastic over it. Temporary fix. He needed major surgery. Major surgery. And I said, I forget exactly what I said to him, but I was laying there with him trying to keep out of we were on top of this hill. And if you stood up, you could get rounds. You could get shot yourself. So I was laying down beside him, and I guess he saw a worried look on my face. He said, "Don't worry about me, man. Worry about yourself." He said, "Because I'm going home." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got to stay in this hellhole. I'm going home. Worry about yourself." That's what he said. Chopper came in. It wasn't easy getting it in because the enemy was firing on that chopper, coming and going. We had to wave that chopper off a half a dozen times. Finally got him in to sit down. We got Daniel on the chopper. 5 minutes out. Pilot radioed back, Daniel died. Well, Daniel did go home, but it wasn't the home he was looking for. It was another home, his spiritual home. I apologize for having to tell those things to you like that. But you need to know some of the circumstances so you can understand the complete story. Right, Steve? The next day, I went on a mission. I was part of a recon mission. Commanding officer wanted to find a better way up that hill so we didn't have to lose anybody. So there was 12 of us, went about 500 meters away, and we accidentally discovered the secret base camp of the enemy. Secret base camp. I walked in that base camp. It was between 2 mountains like this, and there was a river running right through it, freshwater stream in the mountains. Beautiful. And they had stair steps over to one side. Stair steps? I thought, what in the world does these guys need with stair steps? Stair steps. Anyway, there was a place for hospital zone. There was a place for food storage, rice storage. There was a place for ammunition storage. And there was plenty of gauze on the ground in that hospital zone, so I knew they were getting in our crosshairs. But I looked over to one side, and there was some backpacks. North Vietnamese backpacks. I got on the horn and called Alpha 6, this is Oscar 6 Kilo, come in, over. He said, "Yeah, you got it, Alpha 6, go ahead." So we got a situation report here for you, sit rep. He said, "What you got? What you got?" "We got rucksacks. We got backpacks." He said, "How many?" I said, "It looks to be about 50, 52, something like that." He said, "Get all them backpacks and get out of there now. Get them back over here. We heard firing. Get over here." "Yes, sir." Okay, so we got all those backpacks over to our place. And I thought that was all we had to do. I started walking off, and my lieutenant said, "Hey, where are you going? Get back over here." What do we got to do, sir?" He said, "We got to search these things." "Search them? What in the world for?" He said, well, we need to find out how many there are, where they're going, what their mission is, where they come from, what their unit is, all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. All right. So all these rucksacks, they're piled about this high. They all look the same. They're all green, backpacks. They look really worn and tattered. They all look the same. Which one do you think I grabbed? I just grabbed one out of the pile. I guess it was God's unseen hand. Because I started opening that thing up, and out came 2 flags. Now, that's a real prize. I just pictured those flags on my wall at home. But my lieutenant was standing here, and my commanding officer was standing here. They each got one of those flags. But I dug a little further, and they kept all of their stuff in plastic just like we did, because it rained every day. It rained every night. They kept all their stuff in plastic. So this North Vietnamese guy had all his stuff wrapped up in plastic. I started digging through that. There was photographs. There were stamps in there. There was money in there. And writing material and newspaper. Looked like our a Vietnamese version of Stars and Stripes. And I'm thinking, you mean they've got a postal system over here? They got money over here? Now, I was only 19 years old. But I knew the country didn't have those kinds of things. And I knew they didn't need stair steps because of the indoctrination that I'd gone through. Now, the Army, it's not the Army protocol to teach you that the enemy is not human. That's not the protocol of the Army. I didn't learn that from the Army. I learned that from some of the NCOs that were training me and some of the other guys that I was going through training with. But the enemy over there was not human. They weren't human. And we called them any kind of name we could think of that wasn't human. It wasn't Bill or George or Joe, but it was any name we could come up with that wasn't human. It made it easier to destroy them. It gave you more of a will to destroy them. They weren't human. They were just objects. So when I saw those stair steps, I'm thinking, honest, you might find this ridiculous, but I thought, what are little animals doing with stair steps? And the holes that they dug beside these tree trunks, I couldn't even get my head in. These were little bitty guys. I mean, the average adult male only weighed, I don't know, but he was only 4'8" or 9". They were little bitty guys. So they were like squirrels and rabbits and things like that to me, seriously. I mean, I know I bought that hook, line, and sinker, but you need to understand that so you can understand this story. So I went ahead and did my 300 days out of a year, and if you add that up, 24 hours a day for 300 days, it comes to 7,200 hours I was in the jungle. 7,200 hours. If you do a little calculations, that's about a job, 8 to 5 job, 5 days a week, 3.5 or 4 years worth of job. Compacted into 10 months. So we were tightly wound when we came home. The United States government and the United States Army are great at loading the weapon. But when we came home, though, they made one very big mistake. They didn't unload the weapons. And when I came home, I brought home a tremendous amount of anger, tremendous amount of hatred for not just the Vietnamese enemy, but the Vietnamese people as altogether. The war. I was an angry individual. I think if Polly were alive, she'd tell you. But the people said, okay, the war's over for you. Forget it and get on with your life. Right. You going to forget that many hours as a 19-year-old? It's been 50 years. I still hadn't forgot it. And I can't. And that's the big problem with PTS. They call it post-traumatic stress. That's the main issue. You can't forget. Anyway, I tried to forget. I tried to do what some of these elderly people advised me to do, and I tried to re-enter college. I tried to pick up mechanical drafting where I left off. I made straight A's in high school, mechanical drafting. And I tried to pick up in college. I couldn't. I couldn't sit still. So I got in a big 18-wheeler tractor trailer and ran to Canada every week for years and years and years. And apparently I was running from Vietnam and the war and everything, and finally caught up to me. I wound up homeless. I had a nice house, had nice cars, had a family, had land. I'd worked for it all. But suddenly, it was gone. 100% of it was gone. My dad, Leo, found me in Parker County, offered me a place to live until I got back on my feet. It was a long time. But over dinner table one night, of all things, I was talking about Vietnam. Can you imagine? And Polly looked at me, and she jumped up from the table and took off running, and she came back with this box. This box made out of a C ration carton. You know, it's heavy-duty cardboard, and it was folded up like a FedEx box. And she came back, and, you know, I didn't really recognize it until she turned it over. She said, "Don't you remember this?" And it had the APO address in Vietnam for the 173rd Airborne. I said, "Oh, yeah, I remember that." Well, you remember when I was searching those backpacks and came up with those newspapers and photographs and flags and everything? You remember that? Remember me telling you that? Well, there was a little book in there. It looked like a diary. I can remember being on my knees and pulling that little book out and thumbing that book like this, and I couldn't read it. It was all in Vietnamese. But at that time, it was a very strange feeling. It called out to me, the little book, in Vietnam. It was 115 degrees out, you know, I was sweating. But that little book called out to me in Vietnam. So here it is, 20 years later, my mother brings that box out that I sent home, those things from Vietnam, from the jungle. And there was that little book in there. Well, the next day, I made that C-ration box, carton, and addressed my mom and dad's address on it here in Dallas. And I wondered how I was going to get it out of the country because there wasn't a post office on every corner, like there's 7-Elevens here, you know, on every corner. But the next day, a helicopter came in with kicking off water, and I said, there it is right there. U.S. Post Office right there. So I made a mad dash for that chopper, and about halfway there, it's only like 100 meters, you know, about halfway there, that chopper started taking off. And my whole world vanished in front of me. I mean, if I didn't get that stuff out of the country, I was probably going to die that day. And it would never make it to America. And then the chopper started sitting back down, and the door gunner waves at me like this. He saw me running. So I ran up, and as soon as I got close to that door gunner, he stands up, he grabs that box out of my hands, and off they went. Whoop, 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 whoop. I didn't know, you know, helicopters get shot down. Right, Steve? Sometimes boxes get dropped in rice paddies. Sometimes door gunners take things that aren't theirs. But I knew one thing for certain. That box was in other hands. And I turned and walked off and went back to my platoon. I went ahead and did my time and came home. 12 months later. I came home, and you know the story about me winding up homeless, so I was living at home with my parents. Here I was 38 years old. I'd already been on my own. such a tragedy to have to take that handout. I was having to take $20 a week from Mom and Dad just to buy coffee. And I couldn't even get a job. I had no hope of getting a job. I mean, I was at the bottom of the ocean. But Mom brought me that box, and in there was that little book that was crying out to me in Vietnam 2 decades earlier. I got that little book out and started flipping it just like 20 years earlier. And Mom's looking over my shoulder, and she says, "What does that say?" I said, "I don't know, Mom. It's all written in Vietnamese." She said, "You know what I'd do, son, if it was me?" I said, "What?" She said, "I'd get that translated. Maybe there's something in there that can help you change your life for the better, and then you can write a book about it." I said, "Oh, Mom, I'm a trucker. I'm not an author. But here's the book." Took me 3 years to write it. And it's a pretty good work, but let me tell you a little bit about getting it translated. It was a big trouble getting it translated because all these South Vietnamese people living here were from the South, and they didn't like people from the North. They were the enemy, you know. And so I located a guy. His name was Cho, and I'll never forget what Cho said. The night he said, "I'm finished with the translation," he called me up. He said, "Meet me for coffee." So I went out to meet Cho, and he said, "Paul," he said, "I hate this guy just like you do. I hate him just like you do because he enemy. And I said, "Well, okay, tell me what you." He said, "I hate him just like you do." And he started over 2 or 3. I said, "Come on, Cho, out with it." So finally he came out with it. He said, "Well, this man, that you hate, kill your buddies and all that." I said, "Yeah." He said, "He's a good man." I said, "What?" I fell off the table. I fell off my chair. I mean, I couldn't accept that. This was the enemy. And here's a guy telling me he's a good man. I said, "That's unbelievable, Cho." I grabbed that translation out of his hand and stormed out of the door. And I had it all watered up when I got home in my room. I had thrown it up against the wall. And there it was going to stay there as long as I can. I didn't care about it. I wasn't accepting that the enemy was a good man. First thing there, he called him a man. And in my mind, he was still an animal. Well, this is where the story gets really, really nice. Somewhere in there, I was really angry, having an anger fit, and I was screaming at God. Can you imagine that, screaming at God for putting me in that position? I am screaming my lungs out, shaking my fist at God. Why have you done this to me? Why have you done this? And almost instantly, my spiritual body heard a voice. Etherical being, whatever you want to call it. It said, "Well, I've seen you praying several times on your hands and knees, wanting peace. Oh, I got a phone call. Just hearing from God like that was amazing, amazingly comforting. I was immediately comforted. John 14:27 says, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. Not as the world give up, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." I mean, I was comforted. I was really comforted. I know words can't explain that enough, but felt really wonderful getting an immediate answer just like that. And I was at peace. Well, that brought up another question. Okay, so it's the providence, your providence, that I'm here. You must have me here for a reason. What is it? And you know that crumpled up translation sitting over there on the desk? It was crying out to me. So I went over in there and I picked that translation up and I started reading it. It was poetry. You know, I wanted to see, well, we killed this many Americans today. We destroyed this many tanks. We shot some airplanes out of the sky. But this was poetry. So I flipped through the pages. I got to the last page, and there was one poem that just knocked me off my feet. It was titled Love. And man, I went haywire over that. As I was bouncing around, hitting the walls, ricocheting off the walls and off the ceiling. And Polly heard it and came in there. And she knocked at the door. I thought it was a machine gun. It scared me to death. And finally, I let her in. She said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I said, "It's the enemy, Mom. He's using words that he don't deserve. He can't use. He's not human. He's an animal." She said, "What?" She said, "Go make us some coffee." And so I went and made coffee. And by the time I got back, she'd read all those poems. And when I sat down, she started reading that one titled Love. And she read it to me. And it sounded like an angel whispered in my ear. It was so sweet. And you know, the scripture in the Bible says we shall all be changed in the twinkling of an eye. I know everybody here knows that story about Paul in the Bible. The Apostle Paul, y'all remember that? It's in the book of Acts. Paul wouldn't serve God. The Bible uses a nice word for actually killing Christians. They call it persecution. I think that's kind of a cleaned up. Paul was actually killing Christians. He was overseeing their death. But God wanted to use this guy. And Paul wouldn't go along with it. So on the road to Damascus, after some prisoners that he was going to take and have executed, God struck him blind on the road to Damascus. Y'all remember that story? He was blind for 3 days. But God showed him something. And after God showed that to him, he couldn't go back. He became one of the mightiest servants of God, an apostle. First a disciple, then an apostle. I was blind. I think a lot longer than 3 days. More like 2 decades. I was blind. So God said, "There's something I want you to see." And when Polly was whispering that in my ear, like that sweet sound of the Holy Spirit whispering in my ear, I got my sight. I couldn't go back. I was changed instantly in the twinkling of an eye. My everything about me changed. Oh, I still lose my hair. But the views I had about the enemy being not human, God showed me right quick that guy's human. And I couldn't go back. And that was a very hard thing to get over, because once you believe a lie for 25 years, you know, it's almost as if it's the truth. You know, you accept it as the truth, but here I'm being confronted with the truth. And every time I read that little diary, that little scripture, honestly, it was like looking in a mirror. I read the enemy's words. He said he would die for his country. He said he loved his wife and his children, and he was willing to fight and die for his country, just like me. And so I felt a spirit of oneness with this guy. It was very strange because he was on the other side of the world. He had different shaped eyes, different color skin, spoke a different language, had different customs, had different government. It's very strange to be feeling oneness with a guy like that. But I felt oneness with this guy. Whenever I read his little book, it was just like looking in a mirror. And so I had a couple of choices. You know, I hated him before this, but once I got my sight, I realized that if I'm hating him, it's the same thing as hating myself. Y'all follow that? I also realized that if I forgive him, it would be like self-forgiveness. And I realized that. And so I screamed out, I forgive him. I forgive him. And you know, the weight of the whole world lifted off my shoulders. And I've been at peace ever since about that. The material that I took out of that man's backpack belonged with his wife because he wrote so many poems about her and his family. I made plans to journey back to Vietnam and meet his wife because he was dead. I thought, oh, this is terrible. You know, this is terrible. He's dead. But I got involved with a guy that did films for PBS, and he said, I'd like to take you on that trip to meet this guy's wife, and you can give her back these things of her husband's. Okay. So they journeyed over there about 6 months before our scheduled trip in 1993, and they found the family. And I asked Steve when he got back to the United States, you know, any word about him or anything like that, because you know, the last thing I saw was just the jungle devastation, you know. And when we finally did take that hill, everybody up there was dead, and they had a bunch of mass graves up there. And I knew he was one of them. And I knew he died at my hand because one night we fired on him and fired on him and fired on him and fired on him. Nobody could live through that. We had Air Force guys dropping 550-pound bombs and airplanes that had miniguns on them. They could fire at night. Nobody could live through that. And, of course, my mortar, you know, I fired 36 rounds one night and lit up that jungle fortification, lit it up. So he was dead. No, Paul, we found the family. We found that, and that generally means husbands, uncles, aunts, and things like that, children like that. No word on him? No. But one day before we're getting ready to leave, Steve knew something that I didn't. He said, you know the guy that you hated all them years, but yet the guy that taught you a little bit about love, a whole bunch about love? I said, yeah. He said, he ain't dead. He's alive. And he wants to meet you. Me? So we went over there to Vietnam, and I got to meet this guy. And he was in worse shape than I was. Of course, he showed me his scars. And I felt terrible. But they're very congenial people. They're very loving people. And we had lunch in his house. And wife sat next to me. She was actually taking chopsticks and putting food in my plate. And I asked Steve, the PBS guy, I said, does she know who I am? Does she know that I was sent to, destroy her husband? He said, yeah, she knows. They're very lovely people. He and I went back to the battlefield where we fought. And that was a strange experience. But we became friends. And I said, Mr. Nia, Lieutenant Nia, Win Van Nia is his name. I said, Mr. Nia, I said, I've done a lot of damage to you. We killed his little brother at Khartoum. I said, we've done a lot of damage to you and your country and your family. I said, could you find forgiveness in your heart for me? He said, yes, I can. He said, let the past be the past. And I said, you know what? I want to forgive you and become friends with you. We did that at the battlefield. And we turned together to walk down the hill because it was up a 3,000-meter hill. And we walked down the hill together, hand in hand, with our backs to the war, symbolizing we'd come to peace together. We became really good friends. I've been over to see him 7 times since then. And I was just there in March of this year. And he's 91 years old. I had lunch with him in his courtyard there with his grandchildren, some of his kids, and some of his Veterans Association members asked him, said, does Paul really care about you? He said, oh, yeah, he cares about me. Well, how do you know? Well, he's been to see me 7 times from over on the side of the world. He said, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good evidence. Well, he had problems seeing. I gave him his pictures back. I gave him his little book back. I gave him everything that I took out of his backpack. And he's like, well, where's that been all these years? It was 25 years now since we had our last battle. And he's like, whoa, where's all that been? I said, well, it's been in an attic in Dallas, Texas. He said, I needed that years ago, that ID. He said, I needed that. I couldn't get medical care because I couldn't prove who I was. I said, oh, my goodness. He couldn't get his pension because he didn't have any ID. ID over there is very important, just like it is here, I guess. But anyway, we had some good times there together. We traveled together in Vietnam, and like I said, he had trouble seeing these photographs. And I said, what's wrong with your eyes? He said, oh, it's that Agent Orange you guys flew over, and my eyes got burned. I said, that's terrible. On the plane back to Dallas, I told Steve, the PBS guy, I said, you know what? I want to do something nice for that guy. He said, what do you got in mind? I said, I think we can get him a cornea transplant or something in Dallas and improve his sight like he improved my sight. He said, let's do it. So 3 years, I raised the money. All the proceeds I got from that book, I gave them to Steve, and we went over to get this guy and bring him to Dallas. Did y'all see that on TV? Some of you did. I brought him here to Dallas, and there were a lot of veterans at the airport to meet us. A lot of support there. What scripture is it? Let me look at this thing here right quick. Luke 6:27. But I say unto you that here, I spelled it wrong. Love your enemies. Do good to those that hate you. So I brought this former enemy to the United States for medical care. And it was a lot of different channels, 4, 5, 8, and a lot of them had done news clips on it. There was a Vietnamese doctor that saw it, Dr. Van. He lives in San Antonio today, raised in the South. He saw us on TV. He calls me up and he says, hey, why don't you bring that guy into my office? This was a cardiologist. I said, what can you do? He said, well, we can give him a full body exam and see if he's got any problems. Okay, so we took him down there, and he's going to do an angiocardiogram. Y'all know what that is. They cut you right here in this artery, and they put a little wire with a camera up into your heart so they can see it. He couldn't get the wire in. And so he x-rayed it. And he got the x-ray, he went in his office, and he saw the problem. The artery came down about here, I guess, mid femur, and stopped. It had been cauterized. And, that stops the blood flow. If you stop the blood flow in your leg, you're going to lose that leg. But he still had a leg. So I said, what about that, Doc? He said he grew a new artery. He said, look at this x-ray. He grew a new artery. I said, is that possible? He said, it's entirely possible. So he had to have that leg to walk 600 miles back home. But he got home, and he was a weak and wounded man. His wife didn't even recognize him. I guess that's about all I have for you tonight. We're going to have a question and answer period in just a second. But I'd like to say, I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. So thank you. You've been a very patient audience, waiting for me to get through. You've been very patient. Thank you for being here tonight.